The enormous crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers hummed with tension as 12 different alien species gathered for what many considered the most important meeting in 1,000 years. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the combined, breathing patterns of beings who had never agreed on anything until now. Today was different. Today they all shared the same concern. Commander Thex adjusted his ceremonial armor and stepped forward into the center of the circular chamber. His Voltron features were sharp and angular, with skin that shifted between silver and blue depending on his emotional state. Right now it was a deep purple, indicating both anger and determination. The other council members watched him with their various eyes, sensors, and perception organs. "Fellow council members," Thex began, his voice carrying across the chamber through universal translators, "we face a threat unlike any we have encountered in our recorded history. The species calling themselves humans have become a problem that can no longer be ignored." A low murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. The insectoid representative from the Hive Collective clicked her mandibles in what passed for agreement among her kind. The gaseous beings from the Nebula Consortium shifted their containment fields in agitation. Even the ancient stone creatures from the core worlds seemed to lean forward with interest. Thex activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images of human colonies appeared, showing bustling cities and industrial complexes scattered across 17 different worlds. Ships moved between them in patterns that looked chaotic but somehow worked efficiently. 50 years, Thex continued. 50 years since these creatures first stumbled upon faster-than-light travel. In that short time span, they have expanded beyond their home system and established colonies that compete directly with our established trade routes. Their expansion rate exceeds that of any species in Council records. The representative from the Crystalline Empire, a being made entirely of living diamond, spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "Their technology is primitive. Their ships barely qualify as spaceworthy. How can such a backward species pose any real threat?" Vex's skin shifted to a darker shade of purple. "That is precisely the problem. By all logical analysis, they should not be capable of what they have accomplished. Their biology is unremarkable, carbon-based, short-lived, with no apparent special abilities. Yet they continue to expand and thrive in environments that should challenge far more advanced species." The hologram shifted to show human soldiers in combat against various alien mercenary groups. The humans fought with kinetic weapons that should have been useless against modern energy shields, yet somehow they kept winning. Their tactics appeared crude and straightforward, but they adapted quickly to each new situation. "They are warriors," hissed the serpentine delegate from the Scaled Dominion. "Their entire culture revolves around conflict and competition. They fight among themselves when no external enemies are available. This makes them dangerous to the established order." Vex nodded grimly. "Intelligence reports indicate that humans have been in a state of almost constant warfare throughout their recorded history. They have developed technologies specifically for killing other humans with maximum efficiency. Now they are turning those same innovations towards space colonization and resource extraction." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, each species expressing concern in their own way. The Council had maintained galactic peace for over 3 centuries, through careful diplomacy and the threat of superior firepower. The idea that a primitive species could disrupt this balance was deeply disturbing to beings who measured their lifespans in millennia. Thex raised his hand for silence, and the chamber gradually quieted. "I propose a demonstration of Council authority. We will use our newest weapon system to show these humans exactly where they stand in the galactic hierarchy. The quantum disruptor has been tested and proven effective against all known biological compositions." The weapon appeared in the holographic display, a sleek device the size of a small starship. Its surface was covered in flowing energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The assembled delegates had all seen the test footage, entire moons, reduced to scattered atoms in seconds. The quantum disruptor operates by disrupting the molecular bonds that hold organic matter together, Thex explained. It bypasses traditional shields and armor by attacking targets at the subatomic level. No known biological entity can survive direct exposure to its energy field. The ancient representative from the Timekeepers, a being so old that space itself seemed to bend around him, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. Are we certain this approach is wise? Direct military action against a developing species sets a precedent that may cause problems in future cycles. Dex's skin now glowed with confident silver. This will not be military action. This will be education. We will give the humans a simple choice: withdraw from all colonized worlds within 30 standard cycles or face complete annihilation. When they see what our weapons can do, they will have no choice but to comply. The vote was unanimous. Even the pacifist species agreed that showing overwhelming force was preferable to allowing the human expansion to continue unchecked. The Council had dealt with aggressive species before, and the pattern was always the same. Once they understood the true power of galactic civilization, they either integrated peacefully or retreated to their home systems. 3 days later, the human colony ship New Horizon received an official transmission from the Galactic Council. The message was delivered in perfect English, indicating that the aliens had taken time to study human communication methods. The content was simple and direct. David Wells read the ultimatum while standing in the ship's communication center. He was a compact man with graying hair and calm blue eyes that had seen too much combat in humanity's early colonial wars. The other officers gathered around him were equally experienced veterans who had volunteered for frontier duty because they enjoyed challenges. The message played on repeat, while Wells considered the implications. The aliens claimed to represent 12 advanced species with technology far beyond human capabilities. They demanded complete withdrawal from all human colonies within 30 days. The alternative was described as complete molecular dissolution of all human biological matter. To emphasize their point, the transmission included footage of their weapon test. Wells watched an asteroid the size of Earth's moon simply cease to exist as blue energy washed over it. The demonstration was impressive and clearly intended to inspire fear and immediate compliance. Wells turned to his communications officer, a young woman named Lisa, who had joined the Colonial Service to see the galaxy. Send a reply to the Galactic Council, he said calmly. Tell them we appreciate their concern, but we must respectfully decline their generous offer. Lisa stared at him in disbelief. Sir, did you see what that weapon did to the asteroid? Wells smiled grimly. I saw it. Send the message anyway. Also, patch me through to Admiral Stone on Earth. She needs to know that we just made some very powerful enemies. The reply that reached the Galactic Council was even shorter than their ultimatum. Admiral Rebecca Stone's message consisted of only 7 words, delivered in the same calm tone that humans used for discussing weather. We decline your offer. Come and take them. Commander Thex received the human response while reviewing deployment schedules for the Quantum Disruptor fleet. He read it 3 times before he fully understood what the primitive aliens were saying. They were actually refusing to surrender in the face of overwhelming technological superiority. His skin shifted through several color phases as different emotions warred within him. Confusion, anger, and something that might have been respect. All fought for dominance. Finally, he settled on a deep red that indicated grim determination. The humans wanted a demonstration of galactic power. Very well, they would receive exactly what they asked for. The red sun of Kepler 438c cast long shadows across the newly constructed human settlement as warning sirens began their mournful wail. 300 human Marines had volunteered to stay behind while civilian transports evacuated the colony's families and non-essential personnel. They knew they were facing impossible odds, but none of them had seriously considered retreat. Alex Chun crouched behind a hastily constructed barrier made from mining equipment and shipping containers. He was a career soldier who had fought in the Martian Independence War and later helped establish humanity's first interstellar colonies. His weathered face showed no fear as he watched 12 massive alien ships descend through the atmosphere. Like predatory birds, the Voltron fleet moved with perfect precision. their ships arranged in a formation that spoke of centuries of military tradition. Each vessel was a work of art, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. They were beautiful in the way that deadly things often are, and they radiated power that made the human fortifications look like children's toys. John opened a communication channel to his scattered troops. "Listen up, people. We all knew this day might come when we signed up for colonial duty. Those alien ships might be pretty, but they still put their pants on one leg at a time just like us. Hold your positions and wait for my signal. Private." Rodriguez adjusted his grip on his standard-issue railgun and peered up at the descending fleet. He was young enough that this was his first real combat situation, but old enough to understand that he was probably about to die. "Sarge," he called over to his squad leader, "are we really going to fight those things with kinetic weapons?" Sergeant Williams, a veteran of half a dozen colonial conflicts, spat into the red dirt and grinned. "Son, I've been shooting things for 23 years, and in my experience, anything that bleeds can be killed. The trick is finding the right place to put the hole." Above them, Commander Thex observed the human preparations from the bridge of his flagship. The aliens had expected panic, desperate evacuation attempts, or perhaps a formal surrender. Instead, they found 300 humans calmly preparing defensive positions as if they were planning to hold off an invasion force rather than face weapons that could dissolve them at the molecular level. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, "the humans have not responded to our demands for surrender. Their defensive positions are primitive but well organized. They appear to be using projectile weapons exclusively." Thex studied the human positions through his ship's sensors. Their technology was indeed primitive, but there was something about their calm preparation that made him uneasy. These were not the actions of a species facing hopeless odds. They acted like they expected to win. "Deploy the quantum disruptors," Thex ordered. "Target the human defensive positions. Set power levels to maximum dispersal. I want every human molecule on this planet separated from every other human molecule." The 12 alien ships spread out in a perfect circle around the human settlement. Weapon ports opened along their hulls, revealing the quantum disruptors in all their terrible beauty. The devices resembled crystalline flowers made of pure energy, their petals shifting through colors that had no names in any human language. Chun watched the alien weapons charge up and felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he had experienced before every major battle of his career, a strange peace that came from accepting that death was possible and deciding to fight anyway. He keyed his comm unit one last time. "All units, this is Chun. It's been an honor serving with you. When those weapons fire, remember that we're representing all of humanity out here. Let's give these aliens something to remember us by." The quantum disruptors fired simultaneously, filling the air with blue energy that made reality itself seem to flicker and bend. The beams struck the human positions with enough force to level mountains, enough concentrated quantum disruption to tear apart the molecular bonds of anything they touched. The energy was so intense that it created its own weather patterns, with lightning arcing between the weapon beams and the ground. For 30 seconds, the entire human settlement disappeared behind a wall of blue fire. The alien crews watched. Their instruments registered perfect weapon function and total target saturation. Every human in the impact zone had been exposed to quantum disruption levels that should have reduced them to component atoms. The energy dissipated as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the air clean and strangely quiet. Thex leaned forward in his command chair, expecting to see empty ground where the human settlement had been. Instead, he saw something that made his skin shift to colors that had no meaning in Voltron. Emotional language. The humans were still there, all 300 of them stood exactly where they had been before the weapons fired. Their equipment was undamaged. Their defensive positions remained intact. Several of the humans were brushing dust off their uniforms with expressions of mild annoyance, as if they had been caught in a light rainstorm rather than exposed to weapons that could dissolve asteroids. Private Rodriguez yawned and stretched as if he had just woken up from a nap. Is that it? He asked nobody in particular. My little sister's got toys that pack more punch than that light show. Hyun stood up from behind his barrier and activated his external comm system, broadcasting directly to the alien fleet. His voice was calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather with neighbors. Well, that was interesting. Our kids play with more dangerous toys back on Earth. You boys want to try something else, or should we get this party started properly? The human Marines began returning fire with their primitive railguns, sending streams of metal slugs toward the alien ships at significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles should have been stopped easily by the aliens' advanced shielding, but somehow they punched through the energy barriers as if they were made of paper. Vex watched in horror as 3 of his escort vessels simply exploded, their hulls punctured by human kinetic weapons that had no business penetrating Voltron defensive systems. His tactical officer was shouting reports that made no sense. The human weapons were primitive, but they were somehow finding weak points in the alien shields that should not have existed. How are they still alive? Vex demanded. The quantum disruptors fired at maximum power. I saw the energy readings myself. Every molecule in that settlement should have been torn apart. His science officer, a being whose entire existence revolved around understanding how things worked, stared at his instruments in complete confusion. Commander, the weapons functioned perfectly. The quantum disruption field covered the entire target area. The humans should be dead. According to every law of physics we understand, they should not exist. Vex watched another of his ships explode under human fire and made a decision that went against every instinct of Voltron military tradition. All ships retreat to safe distance. We need to analyze what just happened here. As the alien fleet pulled back beyond the range of human weapons, Hyun surveyed his position and counted his people. Not a single Marine had been injured by the alien superweapon. Whatever the blue energy had been supposed to do to them, it had failed completely. Rodriguez, he called to the young private, how do you feel? Rodriguez considered the question seriously. Actually, Sarge, I feel pretty good. Kind of energized, like I just had a really good cup of coffee. That blue stuff wasn't half bad once you got used to it. Similar reports came in from all across the settlement. The human Marines had not only survived exposure to quantum disruption, they actually felt better than they had before the attack. Several reported improved vision and faster reflexes. It was as if the alien weapon had given them some kind of enhancement rather than trying to kill them. Chun opened a channel to the retreating alien fleet. Commander Vex, this is Captain Chin of the Human Colonial Marines. I want to thank you for that little demonstration. Very educational. Now, if you want to discuss terms for your surrender, I'm willing to listen. Otherwise, I suggest you take your fancy ships and go find someone else to pick on. The alien response was predictable. They accelerated away from the planet at maximum speed, their formation broken, and their confidence shattered. Behind them, they left 3 destroyed ships and a human colony that had just proven something impossible. As the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Chun gathered his Marines for a debrief. Nobody could explain what had happened, but everyone agreed on one thing: whatever those aliens had tried to do to them had failed spectacularly. Well, people, Chun announced to his troops, I think we just sent a message to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity is not going anywhere, and we're a lot harder to kill than we look. The Marines cheered, but Chen was already thinking about the implications. The aliens would be back, probably with different weapons and new strategies. This had been just the opening round of what was likely to be a very long war, but for now, they had won an impossible victory against overwhelming odds. For now, that was enough. The vast agricultural plains of New Terra stretched endlessly under twin suns, golden wheat swaying in gentle breezes that carried the scent of growing things. Farming settlements dotted the landscape like islands in a sea of grain, connected by simple roads and the occasional transport tube. This was humanity's breadbasket, the world that fed their expanding colonies and proved that humans could make gardens bloom even on alien soil. Tom Bradley wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned against his harvester, watching the strange ships that had appeared in the sky 3 hours ago. They were different from the Voltron vessels that had attacked Kepler 438c. These looked organic, like enormous sea creatures, floating through the atmosphere with undulating movements that were almost hypnotic to watch. The Ziridian mine fleet had arrived without warning, their ships moving in patterns that seemed random but created complex geometric forms when viewed from above. They were masters of mental manipulation, a species that had evolved beyond physical bodies into pure consciousness housed in living vessels. Their reputation for breaking the minds of their enemies was known throughout the galaxy. Dr. Emma Foster monitored the situation from New Terra's small but well-equipped medical facility. She had trained as both a physician and a xenobiologist, making her one of the few humans qualified to understand alien physiology. Her instruments were picking up strange energy readings from the alien ships, not the quantum disruption they had heard about from Kepler 438c, but something that directly affected brain activity. "All settlers, this is Dr. Foster," she announced over the colony's communication system. "We're detecting neural interference patterns from the alien ships. If you experience headaches, confusion, or unusual thoughts, please report to your nearest medical station immediately." The response from the farming communities was typically human. Most of the settlers acknowledged the warning and went back to their work. A few asked if the neural interference would affect their crops. Several farmers wanted to know if they should bring in the harvest early, just in case. High above them, Overmind Kral extended his consciousness through the living neural networks of his flagship. He was ancient even by Ziridian standards, having personally overseen the mental subjugation of 47 different species over the course of 3 millennia. The failure of the Voltron weapons had been disturbing, but it only confirmed what Kral had always believed. Physical weapons were crude tools compared to the elegant precision of mental domination. "Begin preliminary neural scanning," Kral commanded, his thoughts flowing through the ship's living systems like water through coral. "I want complete psychological profiles of the human colonists before we begin the subjugation process." The Ziridian ships began their work, extending invisible tendrils of psychic energy toward the human settlements. The neural scramblers were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were sophisticated instruments designed to map, understand, and ultimately control the electrical patterns that created consciousness itself, what they found in the human minds. Defied every principle of Ziridian mental science. Kral experienced something he had not felt in over 1,000 years, genuine confusion. The human thought patterns were unlike anything in his vast experience. Where other species showed ordered neural pathways that could be mapped and manipulated, human minds were chaotic storms of competing ideas, contradictory emotions, and random associations that somehow functioned as coherent consciousness. "Impossible," Kral whispered through the ship's neural network. "These patterns should not support intelligent thought. The humans should be incapable of complex reasoning with such disordered mental structures." His science specialists, beings who had spent centuries perfecting the art of mental manipulation, reported similar findings from their own scans. Human consciousness appeared to operate on principles that violated everything the Ziridians understood about how minds worked. Tom Bradley was checking the moisture content of his wheat when the alien mental probe touched his thoughts. For a moment, he felt a strange presence in his mind, like someone looking over his shoulder while he worked. Then the sensation passed, leaving him with an odd sense of amusement. "Huh?" he said to his wife Mary, who was working nearby. "I think those aliens just tried to read my mind. Didn't work too well, though. All they probably got was my grocery list and that song that's been stuck in my head all morning." Mary laughed and continued harvesting. "Which song?" "You know, that old one about the farmer in the dell. Been humming it for 3 days straight." Similar experiences were reported across the colony. The alien mental probes touched every human mind on the planet, but instead of finding organized thoughts that could be controlled, they encountered mental chaos that was somehow more organized than order itself. Dr. Foster began receiving reports. from settlers who had been scanned by the alien probes. The descriptions were remarkably consistent: a brief sensation of mental contact, followed by what many described as feeling slightly caffeinated or more awake than usual. More disturbing were the reports of settlers who claimed they were beginning to pick up stray thoughts from the alien ships themselves. Farmer Bill Peterson called in to report that he was getting mental images of something he described as a really homesick squid who misses his 3 wives and has terrible stomach problems. Krell felt his carefully controlled mental discipline beginning to crack as he realized the magnitude of the problem he faced. Not only were human minds resistant to direct control, they were somehow reflecting the Zeridian probes back at their source. His own thoughts were being invaded by random human memories, emotions, and that infuriatingly catchy song about agricultural workers. "Deploy the neural scramblers at maximum intensity," Krell ordered, his mental voice tight with frustration. "If we cannot control their minds, we will destroy them. Reduce their consciousness to base animal instincts." The Zeridian ships began generating the most powerful psychic assault in their recorded history. Neural scramblers that had broken the will of entire civilizations focused their combined power on the human settlements below. The attack was designed to shatter the electrical patterns that created conscious thought, reducing the target minds to primitive levels that could not sustain complex civilization. The energy struck New Terra like a psychic tsunami, washing over every human mind on the planet with force sufficient to lobotomize entire star systems. The attack should have reduced the human colonists to mindless animals within seconds. Instead, it had an entirely different effect. Tom Bradley was in the middle of singing "The Farmer in the Dell" when the neural scramblers hit him. For a moment, his vision went white, and he felt like his brain was being stirred with a spoon. Then the sensation passed, and he found himself humming the tune even more enthusiastically than before. "Mary," he called to his wife, "I think those aliens just tried to scramble our brains. Didn't work, though. If anything, I feel more focused than I have all week." Dar Foster was monitoring the colony's medical sensors when the psychic assault reached maximum intensity. She watched in amazement as brain activity readings across the settlement actually improved during the attack. Neural efficiency increased, reaction times quickened, and several colonists reported enhanced sensory perception. More significantly, the random telepathic connections that had begun during the initial scans were becoming stronger and more focused. Humans across the colony were beginning to communicate telepathically with each other, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that should have been impossible for their species. The breakthrough came when young Tim Foster, the doctor's 8-year-old son, walked into the medical center and announced, "Mom, the big sad alien in the lead ship wants to know if we have anything for indigestion. Also, he's really worried about disappointing his wives, and he keeps thinking about how much he misses home." Dr. Foster stared at her son in amazement. "Tim, how do you know that?" The boy shrugged with the casual indifference that only children can manage. "The squid alien is broadcasting his thoughts really loud. Can't you hear him? He's pretty upset that we're not going crazy like we're supposed to." Across the colony, similar reports were coming in. Human children, with their naturally flexible minds, were picking up increasingly detailed information from the alien fleet. Adults were developing the ability more slowly, but within hours of the psychic assault, dozens of humans were capable of reading Zeridian thoughts with startling accuracy. Krell felt his ancient confidence crumble as he realized what was happening. The human minds were not just resistant to psychic attack, they were using the attack energy to develop their own telepathic abilities. The neural scramblers were actually teaching humans how to perform mental manipulation. Worse, the chaotic nature of human thought was beginning to affect his own crew. Zeridian minds, evolved for perfect mental discipline, were being contaminated by human emotional patterns. His warriors were beginning to experience doubt, homesickness, and an inexplicable urge to hum primitive human music. Dr. Foster opened a communication channel to the alien fleet, but instead of using radio waves, she projected her thoughts directly at the Zeridian command ship. Her telepathic voice was clear and amused as it reached Krell's consciousness. Overmind, Kral, she said, her mental tone suggesting someone addressing a confused child. We appreciate the psychic enhancement you've given our people, but your crews seem to be experiencing some side effects from contact with human minds. We have excellent medical facilities here on New Terra. Would you like us to take a look at your indigestion problems? The question was accompanied by detailed medical knowledge about Zeridian digestive systems, information that Dr. Foster should not have possessed but had somehow extracted from Kral's own mind during their telepathic contact. Kral's response was immediate and desperate. All ships retreat to safe distance. Maintain mental shields at maximum strength. Do not attempt further contact with human minds. As the Zeridian fleet withdrew in confusion, leaving behind two more destroyed vessels that had been crippled by human fighter craft, whose pilots could now anticipate alien tactics through telepathic contact, Tom Bradley finished his harvest and walked home humming "The Farmer in the Dell." Behind him, the fields of New Terra swayed in the evening breeze, tended by farmers who could now read each other's thoughts and communicate across vast distances without technology. The alien psychic assault had failed completely, but it had given humanity something far more valuable than victory. It had given them their first taste of the mental abilities that would soon make them the most feared telepaths in the galaxy. The massive orbital foundries around Volf 359b hummed with constant activity as automated systems converted raw asteroids into starship hulls, weapons, and the 1,000 other components needed to support humanity's expanding colonial empire. This was the industrial heart of human space, a system where robotic miners and human engineers worked together to build the future one piece at a time. Gary Patterson floated in the zero gravity of Station 7's maintenance bay, his tool belt clanking softly against his work suit as he adjusted the power coupling on yet another mining robot. He was the kind of man who understood machinery better than people, someone who could diagnose a failing fusion reactor by the sound it made, but struggled to remember his own wedding anniversary. His thick hands were permanently stained with lubricants and his gray hair stuck out at odd angles, but he could fix anything that had moving parts. The appearance of the single, massive alien ship had caused some excitement among the station crews, but Gary was too busy with a malfunctioning or processor to pay much attention to whatever the aliens wanted this time. The previous attacks had failed spectacularly, so he figured this one would probably go the same way. Aliens, in his experience, overthought everything. High Temporal Archon Keth observed the human industrial complex from the bridge of his dreadnought, Eternal Silence, a vessel that existed partially outside normal space-time and required constant temporal adjustments just to remain visible to conventional sensors. The Chronarch were ancient beings who had mastered time itself, learning to step between moments and manipulate the flow of causality like others might adjust the temperature in a room. The massive ship was a work of temporal engineering that hurt to look at directly. Its hull seemed to shift between different states of existence, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent, and occasionally flickering out of normal reality entirely. Weapons ports opened along its sides like flowers blooming in fast forward, revealing the most feared devices in the Chronarch arsenal. Time displacement charges are ready for deployment, reported his temporal engineer, a being whose body existed across 17 different moments simultaneously. Target lock confirmed on all human installations. Reality anchors are in position to prevent temporal drift. Keth had witnessed the failure of both the Voltron quantum disruptors and the Zeridian neural scramblers with growing concern. The humans seemed to possess some form of natural resistance to exotic weapons that made no scientific sense. But temporal displacement was different. It did not attack matter or energy or consciousness. It simply removed the target from the timeline entirely. "Begin displacement sequence," Keth commanded, his voice echoing across multiple temporal layers. "Phase the human installations out of baseline reality. Send them to the null time between moments where nothing can exist." The time disruptors activated with a sound like reality tearing along invisible seams. Temporal energy washed over the human industrial complex in waves that moved both forward and backward through time simultaneously. The effect was designed to lift entire sections of spacetime and move them to a temporal coordinate where they had never existed. Gary Patterson was in the middle of replacing a worn bearing when the temporal displacement field hit Station 7. For a moment, he felt like he was falling in 17 different directions at once while time moved sideways around him. Colors that had no names flickered through his vision, and he heard sounds that came from next. Tuesday. Then everything went quiet and gray. He found himself floating in a space that was not quite space, surrounded by machinery that looked like it was made of crystallized time. The other human workers and installations were there too, but they appeared translucent and distant, as if he were seeing them through several layers of glass. "Well," Gary said to nobody in particular, "this is new." The temporal displacement had worked exactly as designed. The human industrial complex had been lifted out of baseline reality and deposited in the null time between moments, a region of non-existence where matter could not maintain coherence and consciousness could not survive. By all the laws of temporal mechanics, the humans should have ceased to exist the moment they arrived. Instead, they began exploring their new environment with the same practical curiosity they brought to everything else. Chief Engineer Ann Roberts had been supervising the construction of a new fusion reactor when the displacement occurred. She found herself standing in a corridor that looked normal except for the fact that she could see through the walls to other parts of the station. The temporal distortion was fascinating from an engineering perspective. "Attention all personnel," she announced over the station's communication system, which somehow still worked despite existing outside normal time. "We appear to have been displaced into some kind of temporal pocket dimension. Standard safety protocols remain in effect. Continue your assigned duties until we figure out how to get home." The human response to temporal displacement was characteristically pragmatic. Since they could not immediately return to normal reality, they decided to make the best of their current situation. Engineers began studying the temporal mechanics of their prison. Maintenance workers continued their repairs, noting that tools seemed to work differently when time flowed in multiple directions at once. Gary Patterson discovered that he could move through solid walls by adjusting his temporal phase, an ability that he immediately put to practical use by accessing maintenance areas that had previously required lengthy detours through the station's corridors. "This is actually pretty convenient," he reported to Ann Roberts. "I can get to any part of the station by just thinking about being there. It's like the ultimate maintenance access system." Other workers were making similar discoveries. The temporal displacement had not destroyed their ability to interact with their environment, it had enhanced it. Humans began learning to manipulate their temporal state through intuition and experimentation, developing abilities that the Chronarch had spent millions of years perfecting. Keth watched his instruments register successful displacement and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The readings showed that the human installations had been successfully removed from baseline reality and deposited in null time. The temporal coordinates confirmed that the targets no longer existed in any meaningful sense. His satisfaction lasted exactly 47 minutes. The first sign of trouble came when his temporal sensors detected impossible readings from the displacement zone. Energy patterns that should not exist in null time were beginning to manifest, suggesting that something was actively manipulating temporal mechanics from inside the non-existent space. The second sign was more direct. Gary Patterson materialized on the bridge of the eternal silence, appearing between moments like a ghost made solid. He carried his toolkit and wore the same grease-stained work clothes he had been wearing when the displacement occurred. "Excuse me," Gary said politely to the assembled Chronarch officers, "but I think there might be a problem with your temporal displacement system. Mind if I take a look?" Before anyone could respond, he had opened an access panel and was examining the ship's temporal drive systems with the focused attention of someone who genuinely enjoyed solving mechanical problems. Keth stared at the impossible human in complete shock. "You cannot be here. You exist in null time. You are outside baseline reality." Gary looked up from his examination of the temporal drives. "Well, that explains why everything looks so weird. Your temporal stabilizers are way out of alignment." When's the last time you had these things serviced? Also, whoever installed. Your reality anchors use the wrong type of quantum fasteners. That's probably why your displacement field keeps fluctuating. More humans began appearing throughout the Chronarch ship. They materialized in engineering sections, on auxiliary bridges, and in the temporal core itself. Each one seemed genuinely interested in understanding how the alien technology worked, and they began making improvements with the casual competence of experienced technicians. Ann Roberts appeared in the ship's main engineering section and began discussing temporal mechanics with the Chronarch engineers in terms that demonstrated an intuitive understanding of concepts that took most species centuries to master. Within minutes, she had identified 3 separate design flaws in the ship's temporal systems and suggested practical solutions. "The problem with your approach," she explained to a bewildered Chronarch temporal specialist, "is that you're treating time like it's separate from consciousness. Human awareness exists in a quantum state that makes us naturally compatible with temporal fluctuations. We don't get displaced by time, we surf it." To demonstrate her point, Anne stepped sideways through 3 different temporal layers, appearing briefly in the ship's past, present, and future simultaneously before returning to baseline reality with a casual shrug. Keth felt his carefully maintained temporal stability beginning to collapse as more humans appeared throughout his ship. They were not hostile, in fact, they seemed genuinely helpful, offering to fix systems that had been malfunctioning for centuries and explaining temporal mechanics concepts that his own engineers had never fully understood. The most disturbing aspect was how quickly the humans were learning. Within an hour of their arrival, they had developed an instinctive understanding of temporal manipulation that surpassed anything in Chronarch educational databases. They moved through time like they were walking through rooms in their own homes. Gary Patterson had located the source of a temporal resonance problem that had been plaguing the Eternal Silence for over 300 years. He fixed it by tightening a coupling that had been installed incorrectly during the ship's original construction. "There you go," he announced cheerfully. "That should stop that annoying humming noise in your temporal core. You might want to recalibrate your reality anchors too. They're drifting about 0.003% off true temporal north." The Chronarch engineer stared at readings that confirmed Gary's assessment. The human had corrected a problem that their best specialists had been unable even to identify, and he had done it with tools that barely qualified as primitive by galactic standards. Keth opened a communication channel to his bridge crew, his voice carrying overtones of panic that had not been heard in Chronarch space for millennia. "All stations, prepare for emergency temporal retreat. Collapse the displacement field and return the humans to baseline reality immediately." The order was carried out with desperate efficiency, but the results were not what anyone expected. Instead of simply returning to their original positions, the humans began appearing throughout the human industrial complex in locations they had never been before. They had somehow learned to use the collapsing temporal field as a transportation system. Gary Patterson materialized in the maintenance bay of Station 12, which was 3 light minutes away from where he had started. He examined his new surroundings with interest and keyed his unit. "Hey, Ann," he called to the chief engineer. "Did you know we could do this?" "I just teleported across the entire system by thinking about where I wanted to be when time snapped. Back to normal." Similar reports were coming in from across the industrial complex. Humans were appearing in locations they had never visited, but somehow they all ended up exactly where they needed to be to perform necessary maintenance or repairs. It was as if the temporal displacement had taught them to navigate space and time by pure intuition. Dr. Sarah Kim, the complex's chief physicist, began analyzing what had happened to them during the displacement. Her preliminary findings were both exciting and terrifying. "The temporal displacement field didn't remove us from reality," she announced over the system-wide communication network. "It taught us how to step outside baseline spacetime voluntarily. We've developed the ability to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. In practical terms, we can now teleport short distances by briefly stepping outside normal time. The implications were staggering. Humans had not only survived temporal displacement, they had learned to control it. The Chronarch's most advanced technology had become as natural to them as walking. Keth received reports of his ship's systems operating at peak efficiency for the first time in centuries, all thanks to repairs performed by helpful humans who had somehow improved on Chronarch engineering while existing outside normal reality. His crew was beginning to question fundamental assumptions about temporal mechanics that had guided their civilization for millions of years. The final humiliation came when Gary Patterson's voice crackled over the Eternal Silence's communication system. Archon Keth, this is Gary Patterson from the Human Maintenance Crew. Thanks for the free lesson in temporal mechanics. We really appreciate it. Also, you left a toolkit on Station 7. Want me to teleport it back to you? Before Keth could respond, Gary materialized on the bridge, placed the missing toolkit on a convenient surface, and vanished again with a friendly wave. The Chronarch fleet retreated from the Volf 359 system in complete disorder, their reputation as masters of time permanently shattered. Behind them, human engineers continued their work with new abilities that let them appear wherever they were needed most. Gary Patterson floated in his maintenance bay, examining a particularly stubborn coupling with tools that now existed in 17 different temporal states simultaneously. The work was easier now that he could reach through time to get the proper angle on difficult repairs. You know, he said to his assistant, a young engineer named Pete who had developed the ability to see 3 seconds into the future. I'm starting to like these alien attacks. They keep teaching us new things. Pete grinned and handed Gary a wrench that he would need in about 15 seconds. Think they'll try something else? Gary considered the question while tightening a bolt that existed in both the past and present simultaneously. Probably. These aliens seem to have a lot of fancy weapons they want to show off. I say let them keep coming. Free education is free education. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they were watched by humans who could step between moments and teleport across space by thinking about where they wanted to be. The galaxy's masters of time had accidentally created something far more dangerous than they had intended. They had created humans who were no longer bound by the normal rules of space-time, the space around. Earth's solar system had never seen so many alien ships gathered in one place. 12 different species had combined their fleets into a massive armada that stretched across several astronomical units, their vessels representing every major military power in the known galaxy. This was not a single species making a demonstration. This was the entire Galactic Council committing everything they had to end the human problem once and for all. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood in the command center of humanity's newest offensive station, watching the alien fleet through reinforced viewports that showed more enemy ships than had ever been assembled in galactic history. At 63, she was a career military officer who had spent her entire adult life preparing for threats that might come from the stars. She had never imagined those threats would arrive all at once. The human defensive fleet looked pathetic in comparison to what they faced. 200 ships of various sizes and configurations, most of them converted civilian vessels pressed into military service. A few purpose-built warships that represented humanity's best efforts at military engineering. Against them came thousands of alien vessels equipped with weapons that had conquered entire star systems. Stone activated the fleet communication system and spoke in the calm voice that had carried her through 40 years of military service. All ships, this is Admiral Stone. Today we face impossible odds against enemies who possess technology we barely understand. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and according to every tactical analysis, we should have no chance of survival. She paused. For a moment, looking out at the approaching alien armada. I have only one thing to say about that assessment. Since when have impossible odds ever stopped us before? Humanity has never backed down from a fight, and we are not going to start. Today, all ships prepare for combat. Commander Thex commanded the combined fleet from his flagship, surrounded by representatives from every species in the Galactic Council. The previous failures had been analyzed, studied, and explained. The humans possessed some form of natural resistance to exotic weapons, but surely they could not resist everything the galaxy could bring to bear against them. Deploy all weapon systems simultaneously, Vex ordered. Quantum disruptors, neural scramblers, temporal displacement devices, and every experimental weapon we have developed. If the humans are resistant to individual attack types, perhaps combined bombardment will overwhelm their defenses. The alien fleet spread out in a formation that had been perfected through centuries of galactic warfare. Each ship carried weapons designed to exploit different vulnerabilities. Some attacked matter, others targeted energy, still others went after consciousness self. Together, they represented the accumulated military knowledge of 12 advanced civilizations. Dr. Emma Foster monitored the situation from her new position aboard the human flagship Indomitable, a massive vessel that had been built in the orbital shipyards around Mars. Her medical bay was equipped with every scanner and analytical device that human science could provide, giving her the best possible view of what was about to happen to her species. The first wave of alien weapons struck the human fleet with combined force that should have been sufficient to sterilize entire star systems. Quantum disruptors tore at molecular bonds while neural scramblers assaulted human consciousness. Temporal displacement fields tried to remove human ships from the timeline entirely while exotic energy weapons attacked the fundamental forces that held matter together. The barrage continued for over an hour, with alien weapons pouring destruction into the human defensive positions at levels that exceeded anything previously recorded in galactic warfare. The energy expenditure was enormous, requiring the combined output of dozens of star-sized power sources. When the weapons finally ceased firing, the alien commanders expected to find empty space where the human fleet had been. Instead, they found something that changed their understanding of what was possible in the universe. The human ships were not only intact, they were glowing. Dr. Foster watched her instruments in amazement as she recorded readings that should not have been possible. The combined exotic energies that should have destroyed the human fleet were instead being absorbed and converted into something else. Entirely, every human in the fleet was experiencing rapid enhancement of abilities they had not known they possessed. "Admiral," she reported over the fleet communication system, "the alien weapons are not harming us. They're changing us. The exotic energies are interacting with human biology in ways that are unlocking dormant potential." Admiral Stone felt the changes happening to her own body as she spoke. Her vision was becoming sharper, her reflexes faster. Her awareness expanded beyond anything she had experienced before. Around her, other humans were reporting similar enhancements. Lieutenant Commander James Wright, the ship's tactical officer, suddenly straightened in his chair as new abilities manifested. "Admiral, I can see the alien fleet's battle plans. Not just their current positions, their intended movements for the next several hours. It's like their tactical computers are broadcasting directly to my brain." Similar reports were coming in from across the human fleet. Humans were developing abilities that exceeded anything in their previous experience. Some could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Others found themselves capable of communicating telepathically across vast distances. Several began demonstrating the ability to step outside normal spacetime, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The transformation was most dramatic among the youngest crew members. Tim Foster, now 16 and serving as a communications specialist, walked onto the bridge of the Indomitable and announced, "Admiral, I can hear what all the alien commanders are thinking. They're really confused right now. Also, they're starting to realize that their weapons are making us stronger instead of killing us." Dr. Foster studied the readings from her medical scanners and felt a chill of recognition. The energy patterns she was seeing looked familiar, not from human biology, but from ancient alien ruins that archaeologists had discovered on several human colonies. "Admiral," she said slowly, "I think I know what's happening to us. These abilities, they're not new, they're being awakened. The human genome contains dormant sequences that are responding to exotic energy exposure. We've had this potential all along." The revelation struck her with the force of absolute certainty. The strange coincidences in human expansion, their natural resistance to alien weapons, their ability to adapt to technologies that should have been beyond their understanding, all of it pointed to a single, impossible conclusion. Admiral Stone opened a communication channel to the alien fleet as the realization dawned on her. Her voice carried new harmonics that seemed to resonate through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Commander Thex," she said, her words somehow reaching every alien ship in the Armada despite being transmitted on standard human frequencies. "Your weapons didn't fail because we're primitive? They failed because we're not what you think we are." The human fleet began to move with coordinated precision that exceeded anything possible through normal command and control systems. Ships appeared and disappeared as their crews learned to teleport across space. Weapons fired with impossible accuracy as human gunners developed the ability to see through time and predict enemy movements. But the most disturbing change was happening to the humans themselves. As the exotic energies continued to enhance their abilities, genetic memories began surfacing, memories of a time when their ancestors had fought against the very weapons now being used against them. Dr. Foster felt ancient knowledge flooding her consciousness as dormant neural pathways activated. She saw vast battles fought between the stars, weapons of unimaginable power, and a species that looked remarkably similar to modern humans fleeing through space to escape total annihilation. "We're not originally from Earth," she announced to the human fleet, her voice carrying the weight of recovered history. "We're refugees. Our ancestors were driven from their home by an enemy that used exactly these types of weapons. They hit on Earth and allowed their descendants to forget their true nature to keep them safe." The implications cascaded through human consciousness as more genetic memories surfaced. Earth had been a sanctuary, a hiding place where the survivors of an ancient war had raised their children to be human rather than revealing their true heritage as something far more dangerous. Admiral Stone felt the full weight of ancestral memory settling into her enhanced awareness. Her species had not evolved on Earth, they had been placed there by survivors, who had barely escaped the destruction of their original civilization. The primitive appearance, the seemingly random technological development, the expansion into space that looked clumsy but somehow always succeeded, all of it had been carefully orchestrated by genetic programming designed to hide humanity's true nature until they were strong enough to reclaim their birthright. Commander Thex received Stone's final transmission as his fleet began suffering casualties from human weapons that now operated on principles beyond galactic understanding. Her voice reached him through multiple layers of reality, carrying knowledge that made his skin shift through colors that had no meaning in any known language. "Your species served the descendants of those who drove us into exile," Stone said, her words accompanied by images that showed the true scope of galactic history. "The weapons you're using against us were designed by our ancient enemy. Every time you attack us, you make us stronger. Every exotic energy you deploy helps us remember who we really are." The alien fleet began retreating as human ships demonstrated abilities that violated every known law of physics. Humans were teleporting across interstellar distances, manipulating matter through pure thought, and communicating with a telepathic network that spanned multiple dimensions. But Admiral Stone was no longer interested in continuing the battle. The genetic memories had shown her something far more important than winning a war against primitive alien species. They had revealed the true threat that was coming. "Commander Thex," she transmitted to the fleeing alien fleet, "your weapons have awakened us, but they've also announced our presence to those who destroyed our original civilization. They're coming back, and when they arrive, they'll finish what they started unless we work together." The message that reached the Galactic Council was simple and terrifying. The humans were not conquerors seeking to dominate the galaxy. They were the descendants of an ancient warrior species that had been driven into hiding by an enemy so powerful that even their advanced weapons had barely been sufficient to delay their own extinction. That enemy was returning, drawn by the exotic energy signatures of the weapons that had been used against humanity. The galaxy that had tried to destroy the human colonies would soon need human protection to survive what was coming. Dr. Foster stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching alien ships request permission to dock with human vessels. The representatives wanted to discuss alliance terms, technology sharing, and mutual defense agreements. The irony was perfect. The aliens' weapons had not just failed to destroy humanity, they had awakened the very powers. The galaxy would need to survive the storm that was approaching from the dark spaces between the stars. Humanity had come home, and the real war was about to begin.